Bibles, we're going to be in Luke 11, and I need to share with you, I'm kind of fighting a head cold a little bit, so last service I didn't know it. I was all over the place with my notes. I couldn't find where I was, and so I don't know if that's to do with a head cold or just turning 40, I don't know. But whatever the case may be, afterwards, I kind of put my hands out. Everyone just say thank you and have a good day, but don't take it personally if I don't hug you or if I shy away. I just don't want you to have what I've got. So, but in Luke 11 is where we find ourselves. We're in verse 33. If you don't have a Bible, there's one there in the seat in front of you. And last week we kind of wrapped up with talking about this idea that Jesus is beginning to more and more create a polarizing relationship between himself and the religious establishment. And I noticed this a bit earlier. I just want to say something. This is way off the subject. But if you're sitting on the ends here, those chairs move. You want to move them and you can face me. I see some of you, that'd be really hard on your neck. So, I mean, if you would like to move those chairs, I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to. I'm just telling you, if you find yourself trapped staring at the door or staring at the speaker, you can move those. Don't, I don't know why I said that other than I feel like a stewardess on the plane. You can these moves both ways. So that's great. Buckle. So. As if you guys aren't adults, you didn't know they moved, I suppose. All right, so back to what I was saying. So the point being is that as Jesus is getting closer and closer to Jerusalem, you're going to find a couple things. Number one, he becomes less and less ambiguous. He is crystal clear about a few things, and we're going to see this happen today. Jesus feeds the fire here. He is getting closer to Jerusalem, and his message becoming much more pointed, much more, let me speak to you, and let me speak to you, and let me speak to you. And so his language becomes much more, as you listen to it, it's like, ooh, you know, he really is stirring up a wasp nest. And so we're going to find that out here as we move into Luke 11, verse 33. Before we do that, though, I just want to kind of set the tone here as we're going to hear Jesus give us some pretty hard teaching. I mean, there's some hard teaching here. Paul in Ephesians chapter 1, he prays for his church. He prays for the church that he established in Ephesus. And whenever Paul prays, it's my belief that God puts that on his heart to share because that's how God is praying for them. That's how God's praying for us. I know that sounds weird, God praying. Who would God pray to? Well, I think he prays to himself, but the idea that he has something for us, something he wants for us, and he states it through Paul in a prayer. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18, it says this, I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. I'm going to say that one more time. I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be opened up, they may be enlightened, so that, or in order that, you may know the hope to which he has called you. Well, what's that? Well, that's the riches of his, God's, glorious inheritance, which is found in the saints, which is found in you and me. And, so two things, that you would know that the hope that he's called you, that hope is made up of two things. Number one, that inside of you and me is the glorious inheritance of God. And secondly, the incomparable great power that's in you and me because we believe this stuff. There is a belief that gives us a power that is incomparable. You could try to compare it. You can't compare it. It's incomprehensible. And then he says, and not only that, but you realize that God's inheritance is in you. And he's pretty excited about what's to come. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Whenever we hear God talk about the gospel and his part in it, he always feels as if he got the best end of the deal. He always speaks in terms of, you don't get it. My son dying, raising from the dead, I would do that in a heartbeat. Do you understand? I get the best. I get you. You are my inheritance. And so God sees that. But it's a prayer. When he says it in the beginning, I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, it means this. You won't understand this with your mind. Your heart will get this as the Lord opens up your spiritual eyes. Which tells me when Paul prays this, that not everybody has it. Because if everybody had it, he wouldn't write that down, right? He wouldn't have had to pray it. Everybody in Ephesus understands that. There's no need to pray that. But not everybody understood that, so he's praying it. And so I think it is today. I think there's a lot of us, including myself at times, where my eyes are blinded to the truth that I've been called to a hope. You know what that hope is? In real simple layman terms, I'm going to live forever. I am never going to die. And in fact, when this body of mine finally gives way, my next stop is a place that's too glorious to explain in words. And I get to hang out and be friends with the greatest, most powerful Alpha Omega God in the world, who loves me with such a radical passion that there's absolutely no way I could describe it to you, because it's indescribable, and the power in that is incomparable. And that in and of itself drives me forward to know I can take today on, and tomorrow better give it a best shot, because my power is greater than what tomorrow can throw at me. Does that make sense what I'm sharing? That is the hope we have. No matter who wins today. How would your life be different if you knew you would live forever? How would you worry if you knew that nothing would kill you? What would your day planner look like? Would you stress out about the fact that your washing machine took a dive and that you've poured money into it and it still doesn't work? My washing machine is from the devil, but incomparable power is within me, because I can pick it up and throw it. No, I mean, the truth of the matter is, friends, is when I lose sight of the hope is when the darkness, I don't want to say the darkness invades, because darkness can't invade light. My light begins to dim. And what takes the place is the emptiness. I share that because Jesus is going to say something to us. He's going to say something to some Pharisees and to some scribes, but this was written in the book for us. And so I want us to hear it for ourselves. So let's go to Luke 11, and I call this the X factor, our hearts. Take a look at Luke 11. We're going to read 33 through 36 to start. We're going to actually cover 33 through 54 today, but we're going to take on the first 3 verses here. These are difficult to understand, but we'll give it our best shot. 33. He says, "No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, he puts it on a stand so that those who come in may see the light." Makes perfect sense. Your eye is the lamp of your body. And when your eyes are good, your whole body also is full of light. But when your eyes are bad, your body is also full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light, no part of it is dark, and it will be completely lighted as when the light of a lamp shines on you. Now, what do these passages mean? There's a lot of debate. A lot of people break this thing down. I'm going to share with you my opinion today about what this section means, and I think it plays itself out in the next part as we look at the 6 woes that Jesus is going to give the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. But I think it begins, number 1, with understanding what a lamp is supposed to do. Jesus gives some very basic lamp using 101. You do not light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Okay, we light a lamp to do what? When you light a lamp, when we turn on the lights, what are we trying to do? We want to see. We want to bring light into the room, right? And when we bring light into the room, what disappears? Darkness. Darkness and light cannot reside in the same place. okay? Spiritually, they're like two cats in a bag. They're going to go at each other's throat, okay? But with light, there is no fight. It's not like the darkness is trying to fight. It's not like you hear the door rattling as darkness is trying to break into this place, you know? No. Darkness it goes away. Jesus just fills the empty, and that's all darkness is. It's just emptiness. It's just empty space. And so Jesus says that's why we light a lamp, to fill up the empty space. He then turns this and he says, now I want to talk about your eyes. You see, your eyes are a lamp to your body. And if your eyes are good, your body will be lit up. But if your eyes are bad, then it's dark. Now, the reason why I took you to Ephesians chapter 1 and said, I pray that the eyes of your what would be enlightened? What does Paul say? The eyes of our hearts. I think Jesus is speaking more than just our physical eyes here. He's talking about our spiritual eyes. When our spiritual eyes are unopened, we live in a darkness. And the church in Ephesus, there were Christians in Ephesus that were Christians living with unopened eyes. So what Jesus says here is that when those eyes aren't opened up, it's dark. And everything you see is dark. Okay, have you ever had darkened eyes before? A darkened spiritual heart? I know I have. There's been times where you just wake up and you wake up late. There's no hot water. You pour your bowl of cereal, but there's no milk. Yeah, should we go on? The coffee, someone drank all the coffee, your fuel's on empty, and your heart, if just like that, can turn dark. And everything around you becomes dark. Isn't that what he says? He says, man, you know what? How come people drive so slow on the parkway? It says 45. Who cares? Let's get going, you know? Or, you know, how come this is, and we listen to the radio, talk radio, yeah, taxes going up, insurance, all the world's going to hell, and how come they're not driving any faster? And so we got this going on, and we have, how come this is happening, and that's happening, and now the washing machine's breaking, and I need to pay this bill, a tax man's coming, and it's just, and it's dark on the inside, and we're just this, and we're just crusty, and we're just, we look like that old puppet from, what's you know what I'm talking about? Walter. Did I talk about Walter last week? I don't know why that's in my head. I think I saw a documentary on that guy. Anyways, Walter just, I'm not recommending the comedy, by the way. Don't hear me to say that. I'm just saying that we can just have this sense we're just scrunched up and we're just hard. And so when our hearts are dark, everything around us is dark. And if it's not angry, it's depressing. And if we're not depressed or angry, we're suspicious, even when good things happen. Could you see this note? It said, I did a good job, exclamation point. Oh, I know what that exclamation point means. Yeah, they just want me to do this, or they want me to do that. And we read between the lines. Look, see this email? They said, hey, have a happy day. How come they're always telling me what to do? Who's there to tell me what to do? You know? And so this darkness is in us. And we pick people apart and we rip them down and we're just stripping them down. Well, they're not saying this right. They're not saying that right. Well, they voted for this. You see their bumper sticker? I don't agree with that bumper sticker. I don't care. I'm not going to let them in. And then we just have this whole thing going on within us. But he says, listen, when the light is in here, then you see things differently. When the hope is alive in you, you see things differently. Does that mean that life is easy and everybody's going the speed limit? No, but listen, there's a lot of gratitude. So Jesus says, you got to be careful. Because what happens is when our hearts get darkened, and that's what he says here. It's interesting the way he says it here. He says, see to it that the light within you is not darkness. Isn't that interesting? People think they have the light in them, but it's not the light. What is it? It's the darkness. They think it's the light. They think all this junk, all this anger, all this hostility, all this depression and self-loathing and this... That's real. And that what needs to be fixed. This is the thing I'm living out of. This is the thing that's going to, this anger, this angst, this is the thing that I need. No, you don't understand. That's not it. That's just darkness. That's not light. It's not it. But if we live out of this, what we do is we say, well, the problem is everybody else. I need everybody else to shine to fix my darkness inside of me. I need to fix this person. This needs to do this. They need to speed up. They need to shut their mouth. They need to speak more. They need to not burn this. They need to do it. They need to. Has it worked? The darkness just gets darker and darker. Because even when they do it right, your next thing is what? Well, they're just going to get me tomorrow. They're doing the right thing today, but I just know that they're going to let me down. So even good things are tainted with darkness. So Jesus says, listen, that's not what this is supposed to be. And Luke says, here are some stories that maybe give credence to this, okay? So what I put here is the fruit of inner darkness. When we have inner darkness, what do we tend to do? All right, I want to take you 37 to 44 here. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. You should underline that because Jesus says yes to that. We'll come back to that in a bit. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him. So he went in and reclined at the table. So Jesus is there, he's reclining, he's about to eat. But the Pharisee, noticing that Jesus did not first wash before the meal, was surprised. Another word here was amazed. So you get the sense that he invites Jesus. Jesus says, sure, I'd love to come to your house. Thank you for inviting me. And so he comes in and he sits down, or he lays down. Actually, it's kind of a horseshoe-shaped table, and you would lean feet out. You'd be like this. The table would be here. And so they're about to eat. Well, you got to understand that the Pharisees don't just sit down and eat. There is much ceremonial washing that needs to be done. That you would put your hands up, and there was a certain amount of water that was dripped over your fingers. And it wasn't just any type of water. It was ceremonially blessed water. It would put over your fingers, and it would have to dribble down. It was measured by half an eggshell. So you would use 1.5 eggshells, was 3 basic eggshells. And so it had to go down a certain way before you could take, and you had to dry them off a certain way. And in certain circles, Pharisaical sects, you would have to do it in between each course, not just at the beginning of a meal, but after you had your salad, then, whatever courses there were there, And so each time. Does Jesus do that? Nope. Jesus sits down and says, all right, let's do this. Let's eat. The guy's amazed. You think Jesus knew what he was about to do? Oh, yeah. Jesus knew. Here's what he says. Then the Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup. It's almost like he grabs a cup. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside, you're full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give God 1/10 of your mint, rue, and other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving out the former. You get what he says there? He says you should have done both. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. And woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves which men walk over without knowing it. Oof. That's quite a guest to have at your dinner table, right? The woe to you is something that's key here. When he says woe to you, it's not woe to you, It's like he puts his hand on his shoulder and says, man, you're carrying a heavy load. I feel your heart. Jesus points out 2 things here in this little section. Number one, that when we have an inner darkness within us, we start to live with a can'ts and the musts type of worship. You can't do this if you're going to worship God. You must do this if you're going to worship God. And a list is created. And in that, he points out two things. Number one, in that way of living, we focus on the externals at the expense of the internals, number one. And number two, the inner light determines, number one, we focus on the externals at the expense of the internals. Secondly, we focus on the details at the expense of the truth. That's what was happening here. The first thing Jesus says to them is that, listen, this thing with the water in the hands thing, what is that about? The question is motivation. Why? Why are you doing that? Have you asked yourself that recently? Why am I doing this? I mean, seriously. Just sat down and said, why am I a Christian? Why am I? Why am I here on Super Bowl Sunday? I could be doing 10,000 other things, and you rightly could be. The great part about real life, I don't know about other churches, we don't lock the doors. Why are you still here? Yeah, some of you are like, that's a good question. I'm going to go home and think about that. All right? And that's okay. I want you to know something. You have permission to never come back. Now you're like, Mike, you don't want us? That's not what I said. But you have permission to ask why. Because sometimes in the darkness, we default to just living without engaging what's really going on in us. And I have no problem engaging. I mean, if I said that and nobody showed up next week, praise God. Now, I know that sounds weird, like praise God, but it at least tells me healing is taking place. We're here. If one person showed up, that'd be great. I might not show up. I got to ask that question, why? Because we pay you to be here. That's a good point. That's a good point. But you understand what I'm saying here? That when we stop asking the why questions, the externals start to rise up. In the internals, we begin to lose focus. Not just lose focus, we lose our way. And all of a sudden, we're more interested in hand washing than we are what we're doing. Now, I know it'd say, Mike, those Pharisees, I can't believe that. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen somebody at a restaurant that you knew were Christians that didn't pray before they ate, and you thought to yourself, well, what are they doing? Anybody? Now, don't raise your hand, because let's flip it the other way. How many of you have ever seen a family praying before they eat and thought to yourself, oh, they're so self-righteous? Yeah? You say, well, I haven't done either one of those. Have you ever judged someone that thought one of those thoughts? There you go. Now we're all three in the boat. We're all Pharisees in recovery here. We're all Pharisees in recovery. We're all people learning that we have darkness in us. We're human. Nobody has total light. Nobody is totally dark. But within us, we're growing. So the first thing he says is, you're so caught up about the outside that you've lost sight of what's inside. You know what you ought to do? He says, you know what you ought to do? All that green stuff, go give it to the poor. That's crazy. No, really. Just let it go. You need to just empty yourself. Empty that stuff out. Let it go. So, and I mentioned here, we focus on the details at the expense of the truth. Some of us are so caught up in the brushstrokes of our faith that we haven't stepped back and looked at the big picture and say, what is God doing in me? What is God doing in my life right now? I'm involved in a mentorship with a young man down in La Pine. He's a pastor, and so he's doing his master's work. So he asked if I'd do a mentor thing, and so he gave me his ministry strategy, all the strategies he's got in his ministry. And I said, this is all really good. The college is really going to like that. That's not what we're going to do, though. And so I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to begin writing your story, starting way back at the beginning. Write your story, and it starts here. begin with a time in your life where you felt like God was most distant from you. What did that feel like? What did it look like? And where are you at today with that? Because we can get so caught up in what we need to be doing today that we look at ourselves in the mirror. If I were to ask you, what is God doing in your life? Most of us we have no idea. I don't know. I just know what everybody else wants me to be doing with my life. But I don't really know what God is doing in me. And my recommendation to you, and that's all it is take your eyes off the details and put everything on hold for a bit and just say, what is God doing in me in this season of my life? Because if not, if we don't, we'll find ourselves taking eggshell water over our hands, wondering, why are we doing this? Well, because that's what we've always done. It's a dark place. Secondly, he goes on. This inner place, this fruit of inner darkness, has a do's and don'ts way of living. This is great. Listen to, because I love what happens here in 45. One of the experts in the law answered, so he wasn't the only one there at the dinner table. One of the experts in the law, which I love, a self-proclaimed expert in the law. I don't know if he carried a badge or a sash or something. He's an expert in the law, but answered him, "Teacher, when you say these things, you hurt my feelings." No, it doesn't say, "You insult us also." That hurts my feelings. Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up. And you experts in the law, you carrying your religious six-shooters, woe to you. What do we do? Well, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. And woe to you, because you build tombs for the prophets, and it was your forefathers who killed them. You testify that you approve of what your forefathers did. And they killed the prophets, and then you build tombs for those very prophets. Because of this, God in his wisdom, he said, I'll send them prophets and apostles. Some of them they will kill, and others they will persecute. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that has been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all. And woe to you, experts of the law. These guys are like, whoa, because you have taken away the key to knowledge. You yourselves have not entered, and you have hindered those who are trying to enter. Wow, that's pretty harsh stuff, right? These guys are like, hey, we just wanted to have a meal here. What's going on? Okay, you don't have to wash your hands. No big deal. But he's like, no. Listen here. This is a bigger issue than this. These woes again. Listen, you guys don't know how sick you really are. You think your darkness is light, but it's not. That's why he says it's like when people walk by you, it's like they walk over a tomb. When people come in contact with these folks, they don't even know it, but they're worse off than if they never met them at all. That's what Jesus says here. So he says, let me explain to you about the do's and don'ts way of living. Number one, there's 3 indictments that he gives against these scribes. He says they were experts on how others ought to live, yet avoided living it out themselves. Okay, listen to this. This comes out of William Barclay's commentary. I don't normally quote commentaries, but this is a good one. He writes this: they were experts in the law. They laid upon men the 1,001 burdens of the ceremonial law, but they did not keep them. They didn't keep those themselves because they were experts in evasion. Here are some of their evasions. Listen to this. The limit of a Sabbath day's journey was 2,000 cubits, which is about 1,000 yards from a man's residence. Okay, that's the law. Now they made up that law, but let's just start right there. So you can't walk more than 1,000 yards on a Saturday. That's their Sabbath. You can't walk more than 1,000 yards. If you did, you're in violation of the Sabbath because that would be considered work. But not if you're an expert in the law. But if a rope was tied across the end of the street became his residence, and he could go 1,000 yards beyond that rope. Oh, but that's not it. If on the Friday evening he left at any given point enough food for 2 meals, then that point technically became his residence, and he could go 1,000 yards beyond that. Anybody confused? It's like listening to city permit laws. It's crazy. It's crazy. Try this one on for size. One of the forbidden works of the Sabbath was tying of knots, either sailors' or camel drivers' knots, or knots that were put in ropes. But a woman might tie the knot in her girdle. Isn't that interesting? They didn't want the women not to put on the girdles, okay? I mean, no, you got to keep those on. Tie that up tight, lady. All right, so obviously this is a male-dominated society. But a woman might tie the knot in her girdle, but that's not it. Therefore, if a bucket of water had to be raised from a well, a rope could not be knotted on a Saturday, right? But a woman's girdle could, and it could use that to raise the bucket of water. And that's what they did. To carry a burden was forbidden, but the codified written law laid down, here's how it reads. He who carries anything, whether it be in his right hand or his left, or in his bosom, I mean he carries it in front of him, or in his shoulders, is guilty. Listen to this. But he who carries anything on the back of his hand, with his foot, or with his mouth, or with his elbow, or with his ear, or with his hair. How do you carry stuff with your hair? With your hair, or with his mouth, or with his elbows. This is like Twister. Or with his ear, or I already said ear, or with his elbow, his ear, his hair, or with his money bag turned upside down. Follow that guy. Or between his money bag, or between his money bag and shirt, or in the fold of his shirt, or in his shoes, or in his sandals. Well, then that guy is guiltless because he does not carry it in the usual way of carrying it out. Anybody confused? Do you understand when Jesus looks at these guys and says, do you really think that's how my God works? Do you really think that's how my Father loves? Do you really think that all this rationalization and justification takes away the deep pain? I know it sounds funny. How could they come up with such crazy laws? Paul would later say in the book of Romans, well, should we go on sinning so grace may increase? Crazy rationalizations and justifications are not just relegated to the Pharisees of the Old Testament, my friends. Well, Jesus died for me and raised from the dead. I'm saved by grace, so does it? I can go do it. I'll just ask for forgiveness later. Now I'm meddling. But it's amazing the darkness, what it can convince our minds to think is okay. But it's still dark. He goes on to talk about the prophets, right? The second thing we find is they were paradoxical in how they treated the prophets. They would have these prophets. God would send them prophets, and what would they do to them? Kill them, right? And then they'd build tombs and altars in the name of the prophet they killed. Isn't that crazy? I mean, God sends them, for example, Zechariah. Here's Zechariah. He's going to be the words, my mouthpiece of my heart towards you. We don't want to hear that. Hey, we love Zechariah. Zechariah was great. You're like, this doesn't make any sense. Who would do such a thing? Who would do such a thing to take a prophet, to take someone that was the voice of God, the image of God, and to not want to hear anything he says, but we'll build something in his name and we'll worship that, but we don't want to know him and who he is. We'll build churches in the name of Jesus. We'll say, I love God. I love Jesus. Woo! Love that guy. Love God. He's awesome. Love my church. Look at this building. It's great. We'll put a big cross on there and we'll say, man, we built this for Jesus. We did it for God. And God says, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor yourself. Well, hey, whoa, let's not get all... I don't really care what he says. I'm not really... I don't want to know what he feels about... Shall I start the list? I don't want to hear about gluttony. Nah, I love him. I kill the words. Yeah, friends, see this. Can we go back to number one? We're all Pharisees in recovery. If we can build up this thing and say we love him, and Jesus says, I don't get it. You build these altars, and yet you don't want to know me. Do you want to know me? Or just need somebody to build something for? So the third part, he says, is that they hindered people from understanding God for themselves. I mean, that's what he gets down there to that last part when he says, listen, you say you have knowledge, but you say you have the key to knowledge, but you don't, and you make it harder for other people to understand. Let me just say this. The gospel message is meant to be simple. When I decided, let me take that back. When I felt like God was calling me into ministry, I was studying to be a lawyer. That was my bent. I was studying to be an environmental lawyer. And there was a part of me that was really bummed when I realized God didn't have that in store for me. And there are days that I still check the application deadline over at Willamette University when I read articles in the newspaper. Someone's got to stand up. So anyways, forget all that. The point is that when I knew that this is what God was leading me into, one of the things I committed my heart to was that if we were going to teach the Bible, we were going to teach it a way that anybody that walked through the doors here could understand what Jesus was trying to say. And that's what we try to do here every day. I'm not great at it. I'm not perfect at it. But I can tell you this right now. This book, okay, this book is meant to be handed to any person, anywhere, at any time, with any educational upbringing, and they can understand it. It interprets itself. You don't need a Bible dictionary. You don't need a commentary. You don't need a pastor to tell you what it means. You can read it for yourself and learn this stuff. That's why when people tell me, well, I won't read the book of Revelation, I don't understand. Well, how bad is that? Who would take a whole book of the Bible and feel like you can't read it? Read it. What do you think is going to happen? I'll read it wrong and devils will fly out of the page. That would be pretty awesome. I mean, but listen, this is meant to be heard by every person. And let me just say this, beyond all that, if you're illiterate, and I say this in the most genuine sense, if you have never been taught how to read, you are not a second-class Christian. You can learn everything about God and never have read this book. You might say, Mike, that's anathema, that's crazy. Well, let me just remind us all again. This book hasn't been in the hand of the common man except for the last 450 years. We have 1,600 years of church history where people learned how to live with God in community, like Chris shared, sharing with one another our lives and our stories and the Word. That's how Christianity primarily grew. This whole idea of a book and chapters and verses, this is all new. This is new to the faith. And I'm not necessarily sure it's been for the better in a lot of cases. I want you to know that if you're here this morning, like, Mike, I don't understand this, and I don't understand that, and I don't understand this. Well, join the club. Nobody really does, including me. The God I knew July 31st, 1988, when I came to know the Lord, is totally different than he is today. And he hasn't changed, but I have, and so will you. You don't have to have this figured out. I love what Chris said when he was up here. Listen, you don't have to have this all figured out. But what you do know, be faithful to that. That's all you have to do. What you do know, be faithful, and you'll grow. The last part of this inner darkness that can happen is there's a fruit, and it comes right here, right at the end. When Jesus left there, the Pharisee and the teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something he might say. And let me tell you something. When you're filled with darkness, when you're just kind of in one of those funks, you're just critical of everybody and everything, and you're just looking for an opportunity to confirm in your mind why you shouldn't believe in something, trust somebody, why they should continue to be your enemy, why you should continue to stay away from them, or whatever the case may be. Okay? I've been there. We've all been there, right? I've done this. You know where I've done this the worst? I'll admit this. Televangelists. Every televangelist I listen to, I'm looking for a reason why I need to turn the channel. And I'll just look at him and say, look at that suit. I can't watch him. That's a Pharisaical attitude. That's a dark place in me that needs some light. Now, last thing I want to share is this, and we're going to be done this morning. Remember I told you to underline a little passage here? Go way back up to verse 37. When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him, so he went in and reclined at the table. Jesus won't say no to anybody. He says no to nobody. If you invite the light in, darkness will be gone. He says yes to everybody that invites him in. Were these guys perfect? Far from it. It never stops Jesus from saying yes to coming and being with you. If you're here this morning, you're like, Mike, you stepped all over me. Awesome. Welcome to the party. You're human. Jesus died for humans. You just have to invite him in. For me, you're like, Mike, I'm saved. Awesome. There are certain places I'm still inviting him in. Certain parts of my life I'm still inviting him in. Father, this morning, I'm not sure where every person's at, and I'm not sure where you find them today, but Lord, that darkness, you said, when it's dark, it's really dark. Lord, I know I can really sense the areas in my life where your light isn't present, because I'm usually pretty negative, critical, and secretive. And those are the places where I want to invite you to come and eat with me in those rooms. I want you to come in and eat with me in these places where it's a bit scary. So God, I just thank you because you never say no. Never once do you ever say no. So God, we put ourselves before you now. Search our hearts, God. We love you. We thank you. And we give you all the praise that you put inside of us in your name. Amen. Hey, let's stand together, and Jeff is here.
I want to share something.